Good evening and welcome to Chasing the Facts. I'm Sam Chase, your host, and tonight we have a little bit of a special program. We have what I guess I would call an election special. We had a town-wide election yesterday. Today the show is airing on Wednesday, April 7th. The election was April 6th. And with me tonight to perhaps take a little bit of a more in-depth look at the election results is Glenn Thoren. And Glenn is on to help us with the analysis. And those of you who watch the channel regularly during the elections know that Glenn is the one of the resident political analysts for Chelmsford Telemedia. He and Kelly Beatty for, I don't know, Glenn, how many years has it been? I can't remember when you weren't doing it.
It's a few, so.
Yep. They do the election reporting on the night of the election. So I thought it would be a good idea to ask Glenn to come in and we'll spend a half an hour or so going over the results of the election. So to get us started, let's take a look. We'll start first with the overall vote totals. So if we can have that slide first. And if you folks at home look down at the bottom of your screen where it says ballots voted. And Glenn, would you care to make some comments on the totality of the election ballots cast?
Yes, it's something we see here we should recognize as a town. But before I say that, if anybody gets a chance to watch a rerun of what went on last night, it was totally different because we didn't have the electronics that we usually have to add up the ballots. Kelly and I were trying to do it with a calculator on a whiteboard that was provided for us, and it was a quite interesting time, including when we were talking to the winners, Mark Carota. We couldn't connect our voice with his Zoom system, so Kelly was writing questions and holding them up. It was very, very entertaining. So if you get a chance to look at that, that would be fun.
It was hilarious, and with the exception of the Zoom participation by the winners, when I turned that on and I saw that whiteboard, I turned to my wife and I said, suddenly it's 1960.
When
the old
magic
technology
markers,
had
everything
to kick
else
in.
had to do it.
Right.
Well, one of the interesting things is if people look at the slide, you'll see that there are many registered voters in this town. 25,864 is a big number. It's a huge number. But if you go to the bottom line and look across the precincts here, how many people actually voted? And it's in the hundreds, and sometimes in 202. The low hundreds, not approaching even 1,000 voters. So participation in the actual process of selecting who's going to run the town has been going down over the years. Kelly pointed that out last night, that unless you have a financial article or something that would draw people to the polls, people tend not to vote. And it's you wonder why that's the case. I'm involved with town politics because I want to make sure the town continues to run well, and I care about a lot of things, and so are you. But why people don't get out to vote is kind of baffling to me. To see Precinct 2 down at 202, I mean, that's up at Williamsburg area, so there are people that may be not permanent residents of the town, but living there temporarily. But when you get to Precinct 7 and 8, still you get 400 and 356 votes in 8 out of 2,800, 2,700 people. That's very disappointing. I always wondered whether if we put on a money article every year, that if you
just to get out the vote,
right? If you don't want your taxes to go up, you should get out and vote, and that might make a difference. But there's no tricks like that. In all honesty, you've got to get people interested in how the town is run.
Right.
And sometimes, if they look at the town and say everything seems to be going well, my trash is getting picked up, the streets are at least passable, although we do have a lot of potholes this year. They say, I don't really need to do anything. The people that vote are taking care of me. Everything's running well.
And I'm going to a little bit later in the, and I generally agree with what you said, but a little bit later when we get to talking more about some of the specific races, I'm going to throw a little bit of a monkey wrench in that, but that's okay.
Please do.
So keep going. So that's, yeah, now the other thing is if folks want to take a look, I don't know if we still have that slide up or not, the overall percentage of votes cast for the town was 13% of the registered voters, which to my recollection is, as you said earlier, it's somewhat lower than what it was 10 or 12 years ago, where you could expect somewhere between 15 and 18 or 19% was a good number. So in recent years, it has fallen off. So
if I knew we were going to talk about this, I had a chart that showed, I think it was 15 years of the total vote turnout, and it looked like the Alps, because when there was a major issue that was coming in the town for taxes or school budgets or something like that, some other item on the ballot, the vote would go way up. And so again, you'd be up and then you'd be down. But the trend, as Kelly pointed out last night, tends to be down. And we need to think about some way to make that stop.
And I don't think it's for lack of the town trying to publicize the vote. And certainly this particular time, it would seem to me more people should be aware of the situation because of the pandemic and the fact that voting has actually been made easier now. You always could vote absentee, but in the last 2 or 3 years, we've had the early voting. This is the second time we've had it for municipal elections. Okay, so I think that is firmly established at this point. And then, of course, the mail-in voting. So really, there were much more opportunities for people to vote. You could not limit your excuse to not being able to get to the polls on the actual poll day. So
it'll be interesting to see what happens next year when we're past the pandemic, to see whether the vote counts come back up or there may be something more interesting on the ballot.
I hope so. So let's take a look at the Board of Selectmen race, and that would be slide number 1 for our producer. And we have what appears to be, at least we had 4 folks running for 2 seats. And one person, George Dixon, is an incumbent, and he has served 4 terms, consecutive terms as selectman. That's 12 years, and he's now just been reelected to his 5th consecutive term. And we had 3 challengers, relative unknowns. Now, Mark Carrata has been in town for many, many years and has served 10 years on the Zoning Board of Appeals. But as far as I know, he has not been active in any other political sense. I don't believe he's ever been a town meeting rep or anything like that.
And the Zoning Board of Appeals is not a high visibility
And that's
board.
correct. And then the other 2 candidates, Latasha Dixon and April Danielson, are relative newcomers to the town. And Latasha has had some exposure to the political process because she's on the Racial Equity Committee, she's vice chair. But April, as far as I know, April does not or did not have any other political exposure in the town. So when you take all of those things into consideration, I think the 2 ladies did very, very well. And so I'll let you pick up the comments from there.
Well, when I went to vote on election day, I was in, I guess about 11:30 at my lunchtime, and basically there were a lot of cars in the parking lot, but that must have been something else because they weren't people voting. I mean, when I walked in to vote on Precinct 5, there was literally nobody there except the people who would take your name and give you your ballot, and you go down and vote. And there was 150 people that had voted in Precinct 5 at that time. But it was empty at McCarthy, at least where I was, and so I was suggesting perhaps they ought to put some entertainment in for the poll workers there because it was very, very quiet. So I had a chance to talk to Latasha and April outside the election area, and they were both very engaging. And one thing, I wish them both very good luck at the election. But I asked them both a very important question because we've seen in the past that people that run for selectmen, if they lose, they sometimes just go away.
Right.
And you don't see them involved in the town anymore. But both ladies were very, very strong in their opinion that they are going to stay involved, and that that made my heart feel good.
That's a good thing. Absolutely.
I saw the debates,
Right.
but the high school students did a superb job in putting that debate together.
Yes,
But
they did.
They both want to stay involved in the town, and like you said, Latosha's already involved in the diversity committee. And I couldn't have been happier to hear that, because we need that kind of, new people in the town to give a different point of view, or bring their analytical thinking to the process. So I was quite excited to hear them say that, and I'm going to call them both up, over the next few days to thank them for running and
Yes.
reinforce to stay involved.
I think that's very important.
Yep.
And it was. I was extremely impressed with the performance in the debates with all the candidates, actually, but especially the two. And I will call the ladies the newcomers, because really I think they've had the least exposure townwide to the political process and so forth. And I was very impressed with the way they handled themselves, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think the town, I told people, I said, look, you've got these 4 candidates. I said, the town can't lose, okay? I said, however this comes out, I don't think the town can lose.
One of the things that I thought was most interesting, I saw one of the debates, the CBA debate, live, and I think there was going to be 5, but there were actually 4 debates held. One of them was canceled.
Yes.
Republican Town Committee or something. But the one that was really interesting was one put on by the high school students. The lighting was good, the audio was good, and they apparently gave them the questions beforehand.
They did, and I know that because I asked one of the candidates, did you get the questions before?
Good way to find out.
Yes, and they said, yes, the only, the last section where obviously they had call-ins
Yep.
or text-ins, they didn't. But I understand they gave the general area of the question, and but it wasn't exactly word for word, but it was enough so that it directly matched with what they were being asked at the debate.
So what I found out in that debate
Yeah.
is a lot more information was transferred, because
Yeah.
the candidates had a chance to think about their answer,
Yes.
package it up into
Right.
a nice, concise statement, and then give it back to us. And
Yep.
so then I learned a lot more about the candidates, about their positions, some of the tax issues, about their position on the town manager, in a very succinct format. So
Right.
I felt like I got more out of that debate. And one thing that the high school students now know, they're stuck with it. They're going to have to do
that's
this
right.
every
That's
year.
right.
So that, that could be part of the curriculum. But they did such a good job, and, they deserve a lot of congratulations for putting on an excellent format.
They do, and logistically well executed and very professionally done, I thought. So let's take a look at some of the actual results here. Now, it looks like George topped the ticket in the selectmen's race. He came out with 1,582, and I will say for the audience that these are unofficial results from the town clerk's office. There are a number of write-ins for the town meeting rep positions, and we're not going to have those results probably for another day or two, at which time they will be official. But I think you can generally rely on these numbers as being accurate. So George carried 6 of 9 precincts. He did very well. It looks like Latasha carried 2 precincts, 1 and 9. One is her home precinct, so you would expect her to do well there. And April didn't carry any, but I thought she did pretty well. And Mark carried 1 precinct, precinct 7, by a fairly good number. So I'll leave the rest of the comments to you.
No, you're exactly right. This was not an election where one candidate literally ran away with it.
Right.
This election was close all across town. The newer candidates had, some low ballot counts in certain areas, but again, they were very strong. So when you look at, how close Latosha Dixon was to Mark Carota, there's only, there's 45 votes there. And so that was extremely close. And the distribution between, Mark, Latosha, and George it was still not a lot of votes. In the case of Mark and George, a 75 vote difference, and Latosha and George, 120 vote difference. Right. And that's a close election.
I think so, yes.
And if more people voted, it might have ended up differently. But this shows that there was very high regard for all of these candidates. Okay. And so it's hard to lose an election like this, but it's also shows that the town was evaluating each candidate for what they heard them say and do and what they knew about them. And Latosha did very well.
Now, let me ask you a couple of questions, since you are I think, considered the expert, and I certainly consider you the expert in the analysis portion of this. Yeah, well, you've run many campaigns, and you know.
I've run a lot of campaigns.
This was a two-seat race, so you hear a lot about the second vote. So would you like to expand on that a bit?
Well, when you're looking at candidates sometimes that you want that one candidate to win, people will just vote for one candidate. So there's some of that going on. It's called bullet voting.
Even though they have a second vote to
Right.
cast,
Even though they have a second vote to use, they'll vote for one to make sure their candidate, the selected candidate, comes in the strongest. But, you know, George Dixon obviously was very popular across town, so people that like George are going to look around and say, okay, who besides George might be a good person to vote for? And so there's going to be a lot of second votes in the election going to, in this case, Mark or Latosha. It's one of those things like, well, who is it?
Right.
And they both rise up for the second vote, while George may have gotten a lot of first votes. It's really hard to analyze that from the number of votes taken. Sometimes, well, when we get to the planning board.
Or the blanks, even, you can't really tell who's picking up the second vote, as you say. It's
you know,
tough.
if there's 4 candidates running and you vote for one person, that's 3 blanks. You know, so that's
Correct.
Yeah. So sometimes the blanks will win an election, but they don't count because we don't know who they are.
Yes, it's possible that a high number of blanks in a situation like this might suggest bullet voting, as you say.
Exactly
Yeah,
correct.
so,
Exactly correct. But you're going to get 2 blanks anyway.
Correct.
You know, without even looking at it.
So
in other elections, we'll get to the planning board,
Yep.
but in other elections, you can see a lot of difference in how the second votes go in the planning board, for example. I can make an argument there.
And we'll get to that. But just before we leave this particular section, so you made an observation about the closeness of the vote and how you thought that was an indication of not a lot of controversy, perhaps, or a lot of good feeling towards all of the candidates. The distribution here, I mean, is there any other observation you want to make before we leave this particular?
No, I don't think so. It's clearly George had a lot of popular vote across the
Yes.
town. I mean, everybody knows George. He's been around. This is his fifth race that he's run. You know, a lot like Bill Dalton. Of course, George pointed out to me last night, I didn't know this, that every time he's won, and this again is the 5th time he topped the ticket.
Yes.
That is quite something to be able to say. That,
I think so. That's
people
absolutely.
in town thought you were the best candidate
Yep.
5 elections in a row.
Okay, so that's the message. That's the other message.
Yeah,
and you're
right.
right. Yeah, absolutely right.
There's no learning on the job. He
Nope.
knows what the job is, and you know people are going to expect him to represent, you know, the town and the things that they need to have done or looked at.
Correct. And George, I mean, I've known George for years, and we've talked a lot, and he prides himself on what I guess we can call constituent services. I mean, if you call George, he picks up the phone, and you can talk to a real live select person.
Exactly.
And you're going to get some consideration, whatever it is, and that is very important. I think Tip O'Neill said all politics is local. Well,
Yes, it is.
when it's local politics, it's really local, okay? But sometimes, you know, we've had people in that office over the years that haven't understood that, you know, and George understands it very well, and I think he certainly benefited from that. So why don't we move on to the planning board race, and I'll let you take it from there.
Well, this was a very interesting race, and so there's a lot of messaging behind what the totals were on this. In fact, I found it fascinating that Tim Shanahan and Paul McDougal got exactly the same vote count.
Amazing.
I don't remember ever having seen that before. 14-12.
Not across 9 precincts.
No.
I mean, statistically, what are we talking about here? What are the chances of that happening? It's just...
It's got to be a small number.
Yeah.
But the one thing that you do notice across all the precincts is Deidre Conley was way ahead of every other candidate across those precincts. So there was an inherent strength in her running for this position. Comes probably from that large condominium complex that was going to be put behind the Oddfellows Hall in the center of town. The one that's behind the Java Room, I mentioned last night, that you know it's about the same size, but it's not terribly in your face. It's tucked away where an old building used to be. It's up against the trees, so unless you look to the side, you really don't see it.
That is a very good point, and you could even argue it's an enhancement because of the landscaping that they put in. I mean,
Yes,
when
yeah, and
that,
considering what they
right,
removed.
Right, no, it is, I don't consider the two situations at all comparable based on what you just said.
And neither
Right.
do I. And neither did Deidre, by the way.
No, she didn't. She didn't. No.
She was one of the key people in a petition that was started months ago to get in front of the planning board with thousands of signatures to seriously consider not putting that condominium complex right behind the Oddfellows Hall because it would be very visible in the center of town.
I think within a 3-week period, I think she was able to garner approximately 2,600 signatures.
And that's a lot.
I've never
That's a
seen
lot.
anything like that in the town. In that short period of time, okay, to generate that kind of interest. Of course, I mean, years ago you didn't have the social media network to help with that, but still, that's quite an effort.
So you have to look at, her name was actually attached to that
Yes.
petition. And so when people looked at, who's running for planning board, they say Deidre Conley, and I'm sure she got the word out. She's a person that would be involved in discussing why not to have a large condominium complex in the center of town. It's a voice that was outside the planning board, and now it's inside the planning board. So when I looked at her votes, a lot of people might like one of the other candidates, know one of the other candidates. I suspect she got a lot of second votes.
Yes.
They voted for Deidre and somebody else.
Yes.
And that added up tremendously as you went from precinct to precinct to precinct. And a lot of people, when you look at the numbers here, I think also voted for just Deidre, for the intent to make sure that there's a strong voice on the planning board for large developments in town. If you look across Chelmsford, now I moved here in 1980. I don't remember when you came to town.
79.
79, you beat me.
Not
But
by much.
the town has changed a lot.
Oh, yes.
If you go down Route 110, there wasn't Kensington, there wasn't the low-income housing, other housing down there. And there certainly wasn't that multicolored whatever it is complex that's going over Beaver Brook, which
Yes.
I don't mind that it's 3 stories high, but somebody really should have looked at the color combination.
I wish it could be a little bit more attractive.
Yeah, it just looks odd. But there's a lot of housing like that going in across the town, including the ones I mentioned in the center of town, and having one that's right in the heart of town behind the Oddfellows building that was that big and that expansive was just not something that many people that voted for Deidre would not want in this town. And this is how they expressed their sentiment on that, by putting her on the planning board.
Yes, I think that's absolutely correct, and she did a very good job, I think, getting her message out. And I thought it was a little strange. Now you watched all of the debates, and there was no debate activity among any of the planning board candidates at any of the debates, and you would expect that in an uncontested race.
Right.
But this was a contested race. We have 4 people running for 3 seats. So you say, well, it's not like 4 people running for 2 seats, but still, it's contested. And if you want to get reelected, I think it's incumbent upon you to do everything you can to get your message out.
I'm wondering why the people didn't participate.
I don't know.
Because it was entirely up to them.
Now, Deirdre did, I think it was at the league debate. I could be wrong, but I think I'm remembering this correctly.
She gave a statement.
She gave a
something.
statement.
Yeah, right.
But we didn't see Mr. Cole, Mr. McDougal, or Mr. Shanahan in any of the debates, and I thought that was a little bit strange. So, and she carried, as you said, she carried all 9 precincts
By a lot.
handily.
Yep.
So I think that definitely, as you said, sends a message. Now, the school committee race, I want to talk about that just for a minute.
I was hoping you'd mention
Not
that.
a race. Okay, again, this is uncontested. Donna Newcomb, candidate for re-election. And I want to make 2 quick observations, and then we'll hear from you. First of all, she did very well. She's uncontested, so people didn't have to vote for her. She was going to win anyway. But look at the vote total.
That's right.
Look at her vote total.
And look at the blank total.
And
when you look at the people that didn't vote for for Donna, because she was the only one there, the people that didn't vote for a school committee member is small.
exactly.
They wanted to vote for her, they did vote for her, they just say, Donna, keep doing your job.
Exactly.
You're doing great.
This is, in my estimation, a ringing endorsement of Donna Newcomb for school committee.
Couldn't have said it better.
The other thing I would like to mention is it is disappointing as much as people wanted Donna back in there. It is kind of disappointing that this is an uncontested race. The school committee is arguably, you know, the two top important boards in town are select board and school committee, and people can disagree which is more important than the other, but certainly school committee is a tremendous responsibility. And
well, as you know,
it's interesting.
As you know that I know.
Oh, well, you know, believe me, I know you
Because
know.
Evelyn was 6 terms
Exactly.
on the school committee, and I calculated one year how many hours she had put in that year. It was close to 1,000 hours.
Doesn't surprise me at all.
They don't pay them anything,
No, they don't.
and it's all about getting the right educational infrastructure and teachers and programs for the kids. And what could be more important than that? You know, so she was very dedicated to it, as is Donna.
As is Donna.
And it takes a lot of time.
But I think this also says, after my complaint about, you know, non-opposition on the positive side, I think this also says that people are satisfied with the school committee. You know?
If there was somebody that appeared to be not interested, not doing their
Right,
job or
right.
something, you would get a candidate in there to compete with them. But you know, Donna was not going to be that person.
Let's talk a little bit about the two precinct rep races. And again, we have 9 precincts, and we have 6 slots to fill every year. The precinct rep term is for 3 years, and we have 18 reps per precinct, so a third is elected every year. That's how it works. So we had, despite all of the talk about a lack of candidates for these seats, there were 2 precincts where we actually had contests, and one was Precinct 1, and the other was Precinct 3, and we have about 3 minutes left in the show, so you can comment on both of those
Very
situations.
quickly, you know, Kevin Reddy lost his seat in Precinct 1. Not by much, just by about 5 votes, but that's all it takes. And that was a little bit of a surprise because the Reddy family is very well known in town. I've been involved in politics for years. But you know, that's the what happens when you have a race like this. You've got to run for that seat if it's contested. And unfortunately, Kevin did not get enough votes to stay in that seat.
Yeah, we had 7 people running for 6 seats in that
Right.
precinct. And in Precinct 3, we had 9 people
Running for 6.
running for 6, which
and,
is...
and 3 people
right.
were eliminated. And you know, this is what happens when you have a lot of people running, and that's okay because they'll probably try and come back next year and get a seat on the town meeting, because the town meeting does everything in the town that requires, you know, financial input, all the fundings for the schools, the funding for projects in town goes through the town meeting, otherwise it can't be done. Changes in the charter, bylaws, zoning, has to go through town meeting. It's a very important position, and the thing that was very frustrating to me, there were many seats that were not even competed with in the town. There were 5 people or 4 people running for 6 seats. It was troubling, and we have to find out why that's the case. It could be COVID. It could be something else that's going on. People are overoccupied just trying to get through this phase of the virus and everything else.
Now, some of those seats will be filled by the write-ins. And,
Yes.
and as I said earlier in the show, it'll take the town clerk a couple of days to wind that up and finish that tabulation. But the way that works is if you get 1 vote, you're in. I mean, if the spot is the charter was changed a couple of years ago to eliminate the minimum, which is probably a good thing considering we don't have people running for the spots.
No, I mean, you don't want to
know?
see empty seats.
Right,
So,
exactly.
And some of these people were obviously encouraged to run, and hopefully they find it interesting and are willing to contribute and do research, because good town meeting members, it requires research on the issues that are coming up on the warrant.
As you said, it's a very, very important position. The way to think of it is your town meeting, whether it's an open town meeting or a representative town meeting such as we have here in Chelmsford, it is the legislature for your town.
Yep.
If it doesn't get by town meeting, it doesn't fly. It's
We
that
are
simple.
the government.
That is absolutely
The town
correct.
meeting is a government.
Just because the town manager wants something, or the board of, or the select board wants something, if it doesn't get through town meeting,
Right.
it's dead. Very important, and you're right. And most of the folks, I think, who serve in town meeting take it very seriously. I'll leave you with one thought. I did notice this time an awful lot of veteran town meeting folks did not choose to re-up.
I noticed that as well.
Yeah, and I think the sense is that, perhaps they felt that it was time for them to step aside and let some of the newer folks get in, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
No, and we will see how. One other thing is town meeting is moving to June, which I think is an excellent idea because more people will be vaccinated. It'll be a healthier town meeting,
Right.
and I think that's what everybody wants. It's